Hello everyone, I'm Ryan, and I'm here to guide you today through the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains. If you use this video to fall asleep, please like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get comfortable, and relax. The Watching Woods Paulo Silva had been planning this trip for 3 months, ever since his girlfriend Vanessa said yes to his proposal. 28 years old, athletic build with dark curly hair and warm brown eyes, Paulo was the kind of person who researched everything obsessively: trail maps, weather patterns, campsite reviews. He'd printed out 17 pages of hiking advice and studied them until Vanessa begged him to stop. His apartment walls were covered with marked-up maps, highlighted trails, and notes about wildlife sightings. His co-workers at the software company where he worked as a developer had joked that he was more prepared for this 3-day camping trip than most people were for their weddings. Vanessa Martinez was 26, with freckles scattered across her nose and an infectious laugh that made strangers smile. She worked as an elementary school teacher and had never been camping in her life. Had never even owned a pair of hiking boots until Paulo bought them for her birthday 2 months ago. She trusted Paulo completely, loved his careful planning and attention to detail, which was why she'd agreed to this pre-wedding adventure in the Appalachian Mountains despite her complete lack of outdoor experience. Her students had made her a good luck banner before fall break, decorating it with drawings of bears and trees and little stick figures that were supposed to be her and Paulo. Their third companion was Paulo's college roommate, Derek Walsh, 30 years old, perpetually sarcastic, with sandy blonde hair and a cocky grin that had gotten him out of more trouble than it had caused. Derek worked in sales and had the kind of confidence that came from never having faced real consequences. He'd shown up at Paulo's apartment the morning they left with designer hiking boots still creaking with newness, tags barely removed, and a flask of expensive whiskey he kept calling survival supplies. He'd been making jokes about the Blair Witch Project since they'd loaded Paulo's car, doing exaggerated impressions of the shaky camera work, until Vanessa laughed so hard she snorted. The drive from their homes in Charlotte, North Carolina to the trailhead had taken 4 hours. Paulo had chosen a less popular section of the Appalachian Trail, one that promised solitude and pristine wilderness. The parking lot had been empty when they arrived at 7:30 a.m. on a Friday morning in mid-October. A wooden sign, weathered and ancient-looking, marked the trailhead: Blackwater Ridge Trail, 12 miles to Summit Creek Campsite. Someone had carved something into the wood below the official text, but it was too worn to read clearly. Paulo thought he could make out the word turn and maybe back, but Derek was already heading up the trail, and Vanessa was excited to start, so Paulo didn't mention it. The trail had been perfect at first. October sunlight filtered through centuries-old oaks and maples, painting everything in amber and gold. The Appalachian Range stretched around them, ancient and vast, wearing its 300 million years like a patient predator. These mountains had seen the rise and fall of entire species, had watched as continents drifted and collided, had stood when dinosaurs walked the earth and would stand long after humanity was forgotten. The trees here were massive, their trunks thick as cars, their roots breaking through the path like arthritic knuckles. Vanessa had stopped every few minutes to take photos. The canopy overhead, where sunlight pierced through gaps in the leaves like divine spotlights. A peculiar twisted tree that looked almost like a human figure bent in agony. Paulo smiled as he held her hand and pointed out a hawk circling overhead. She'd brought a nice camera, not just her phone, and kept exclaiming over the perfect lighting. Derek had rolled his eyes good-naturedly and made jokes about Instagram influencers, but Paulo could tell he was enjoying himself too. They'd passed a few other hikers in the first hour, an older couple with expensive gear who nodded politely, a solo hiker who'd warned them that rain was predicted for Sunday, a young family with 2 kids who looked exhausted before they'd barely started. But after that first hour, they saw no one. The trail was theirs alone. By the time they noticed the silence, they'd been hiking for 4 hours and had stopped for lunch at a scenic overlook. Paulo had made sandwiches that morning, carefully wrapped in plastic bags with ice packs to keep them fresh. They sat on a flat rock that jutted out from the mountainside, eating and drinking water while admiring the view of endless forested ridges stretching to the horizon, each layer fading into pale blue distance. It started when Derek stopped mid-sentence, his joke about Vanessa's pink backpack dying on his lips. He'd been saying something about how it looked like a Barbie accessory, and Vanessa had been laughing and throwing a small pine cone at him when Derek suddenly went quiet, his head tilted, listening. The forest had been full of sound moments before. Birds calling in complex conversations, leaves rustling in the gentle breeze, the distant drumming of a woodpecker, the chittering of squirrels arguing over territory, even the buzzing of insects. Now there was nothing. Even their footsteps seemed muffled, absorbed by the heavy air. The wind had stopped. No birds, no insects. Even the trees seemed to have stopped their subtle creaking and swaying. "That's weird," Vanessa said, her voice too loud in the quiet. She lowered it instinctively. "Where did all the birds go?" Paulo felt a chill run down his spine despite the mild temperature. He'd read about this phenomenon in one of his research binges, how animals sometimes went silent before earthquakes or severe storms. But the sky was clear, bright blue with only a few wispy clouds, and he hadn't felt any tremors. He consulted his phone. No signal, which he'd expected. They were deep in the mountains now, but his GPS app was spinning uselessly. The little blue dot that represented their location kept jumping to impossible places, sometimes showing them behind where they'd started, sometimes far off the trail to the north, sometimes appearing on what looked like a completely different mountain range, sometimes not appearing at all. He frowned at the compass function. The needle was rotating slowly, continuously, never settling on north. It would point northeast, then east, then southeast, in a slow, deliberate circle that made no sense. "Technology," Derek said with forced lightness, taking a swig from his flask. "This is why I don't trust it. Give me a good old paper map any day." He was trying to sound casual, but Paulo noticed he kept glancing around at the tree line, his usual cocky demeanor cracking. Paulo pulled out his printed map, the one he'd laminated to protect from rain and sweat. At least paper couldn't glitch. According to the map and their pace, they should be about 7 miles in, with another 5 miles to the campsite. They were making good time, maybe even better than he'd planned. They continued walking, but something had changed. The trail looked different, felt different. Paulo couldn't articulate how, couldn't exactly. The markers were still there, those familiar white blazes painted on trees every 100 yards or so, but they seemed farther apart than before, or maybe closer together in some sections. The path itself had narrowed, or maybe the trees had crowded closer. Branches reached across the trail like grasping fingers, when Paulo could have sworn they'd been walking through wider, more open forest just an hour before. The afternoon light had taken on a strange quality too, greenish and thick, like they were walking underwater or through old glass. The shadows didn't fall quite right, angling in directions that didn't match the sun's position. Paulo kept checking his watch. It was only 2:15 p.m., they had plenty of daylight left, but something about the light made him anxious. Vanessa saw it first. She stopped so abruptly that Paulo bumped into her back, his hiking pole nearly tangling with hers. "What the hell is that?" 15 feet off the trail, perfectly vertical among the leaf litter and gnarled roots, stood a staircase. It was made of dark red metal, industrial and modern, the kind of fire escape you might see on an old apartment building in Brooklyn or Boston. 8 steps leading up to nothing, ending in empty air about 12 feet off the ground. Rust spotted the handrails in places, orange-brown against the dark red paint, but the structure looked sturdy, well-constructed, like it had been installed by professionals. The stairs were carpeted. Paulo could see the industrial gray carpet on each step, slightly moth-eaten but intact. It was completely out of place in the ancient forest, anachronistic and wrong in a way that made Paulo's stomach turn. Derek laughed, but it sounded uncertain, hollow. "Some art installation or something. Rich hippies probably put it here. You know, make people question reality and nature and all that pretentious crap." But Paulo didn't think it was an art installation. There was no plaque, no explanation, no artist's statement. And who would carry a metal staircase this far into the wilderness? The logistics were impossible. Each step probably weighed 50 pounds. The railings had to be heavy steel. There was no vehicle access, no way to bring equipment this far in. "We should keep moving," Paulo said. Something about the staircase made his skin crawl, made the hair on his arms stand up despite the warm afternoon. He remembered reading something online months ago, some warning about staircases in the woods, part of the weird lore about the Appalachians. Don't look at them. Don't climb them. Don't acknowledge them. The memory slipped away like smoke, frustratingly vague. He'd read so many articles, so many forum posts and hiking blogs and Reddit threads about these mountains. Some of it had seemed like creepypasta, internet horror stories that people told for fun. But now, standing here, the staircase felt real and wrong and dangerous in a way he couldn't explain. "I want a picture," Vanessa said, already moving toward it, her camera up. She was a teacher, practical and grounded, not given to superstition. To her, this was just weird and interesting. "Don't!" Paulo grabbed her arm, surprising himself with his urgency, his fingers tight around her wrist. "Please, let's just go." She looked at him strangely, her brow furrowed. She'd never seen him like this. Paulo was always calm, always rational, always had an explanation. "Are you okay? It's just a weird staircase. Probably some old structure. Maybe there was a fire tower here or something." But fire towers had platforms at the top, buildings, purpose. This had nothing, just stairs climbing to empty air. "Please," Paulo repeated. "Something's wrong. I can feel it." Vanessa must have heard something in his voice, seen something in his face, because she nodded slowly and stepped back. Derek shrugged, taking another pull from his flask. But Paulo noticed he didn't argue, didn't insist on investigating. Even Derek's bravado had limits. They walked on, leaving the staircase behind. Paulo glanced back once and immediately wished he hadn't. For just a moment, less than a second, maybe just a trick of the light, he could have sworn there was someone standing at the top of the stairs. A dark silhouette, human-shaped but wrong somehow. Too tall, or too thin, or too still. When he blinked, it was gone, just empty air and trees and shadows. The feeling of being watched started then. It began as a prickling at the base of Paulo's skull, the animal awareness of eyes on him. The same feeling you get walking alone at night in the city. That certainty that someone is behind you even though you hear nothing. He kept turning, scanning the forest, but saw only trees and shadows, shadows that seemed too dark for the available light, pools of blackness between the trunks that his eyes couldn't quite penetrate. Shadows that didn't quite match the shapes that cast them. He'd see a thin tree, but its shadow would be thick and bulbous, or a boulder that cast a tall humanoid shadow that moved slightly when he wasn't looking directly at it. "Does anyone else feel like—" Vanessa trailed off, her voice uncertain. "Like we're not alone," Derek finished. He'd stopped making jokes entirely now. His hand kept drifting to the can of bear spray on his belt, his fingers drumming nervously on the plastic cap. "Like something's watching us." "Yes," Paulo said quietly, "since the staircase." They walked faster, not quite running but moving with purpose, wanting distance between themselves and whatever they felt. The trail wound through the forest, climbing steadily. Paulo's calves burned with the effort, his breath coming harder. Vanessa was struggling, she wasn't used to this. And they'd been hiking for hours, but she didn't complain, just kept putting one foot in front of the other, her face pale and determined. They should have reached the campsite an hour ago. Paulo checked his printed map for the dozenth time, but the landmarks didn't match anymore. That distinctive rock formation, the one described in his guidebook as like a giant's fist emerging from the earth, should have been on their left about a mile back, but Paulo hadn't seen anything like that. This stream they were crossing wasn't marked on his map at all, and his map was detailed, showed every creek and tributary, and the white blazes they'd been following were now spaced irregularly, sometimes appearing on trees that forked away from the main path entirely, leading off into dense underbrush where no trail existed. The sun was setting fast, faster than it should. Paulo checked his watch obsessively, 3:47 p.m., then suddenly 5:23 p.m., then 6:41 p.m. He couldn't remember the time passing. One moment there had been plenty of daylight. The next the forest was filling with dusk. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in what felt like minutes. Their breath began to fog, Paulo's fingers going numb as he gripped his hiking poles. "We need to make camp," Paulo said, his voice tight. "Right here. We'll figure it out in the morning." He didn't want to admit they were lost, but they were. Completely, utterly lost. His careful planning, his 17 pages of research, his laminated maps, all useless. They found a small clearing ringed by massive oaks, whose branches twisted overhead like arthritic fingers, their bark black with age and covered in strange, pale lichens that seemed to glow faintly in the dimming light. Derek gathered wood while Vanessa helped Paulo set up the tent. The routine tasks should have been comforting. Paulo had practiced this in his backyard a dozen times, but the silence had returned, heavier now, oppressive, like a physical weight pressing down on them. Even the crackle of their fire seemed muted, the flames casting wild shadows that moved independently of the wind, dancing in patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost like figures reaching and grasping. Paulo tried his phone again. Still no signal. The GPS was worse now. It showed them in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, then in downtown Atlanta, then simply displayed an error message. The battery was draining too, despite being fully charged that morning. It had dropped from 87% to 23% in the time it took him to check. They ate dinner in silence, dehydrated camping food that tasted like cardboard, but none of them had much appetite anyway. Vanessa sat close to Paulo, her shoulder pressed against his, seeking comfort. Derek stared into the fire, his flask finally empty, his cocky demeanor completely gone. He looked young suddenly, vulnerable, scared in a way Paulo had never seen him. It was Derek who heard it first. "Did you hear that?" They all froze, forks halfway to mouths. In the distance, barely audible, someone was calling, "Paulo, Paulo, where are you?" It was Vanessa's voice. Vanessa, who was sitting right there across the fire, her face draining of color, her eyes going wide with terror. "Paulo, I'm lost. Please, I can't find the trail. Paulo, I'm scared. Where are you?" The voice was coming from deeper in the woods to the east, growing more desperate. It was perfect. Not just similar, but perfect. The exact cadence of Vanessa's speech, her slight southern accent inherited from her grandmother in Georgia, even the way she pronounced his name with a soft P sound, the tiny lisp she had when she was frightened. Paulo had been with her for 3 years, had heard every variation of her voice, and this was exact. Impossible, but exact. "What the fuck?" Derek whispered, his voice cracking. "What the actual fuck?" "Don't answer," Vanessa said, and Paulo heard the terror in her real voice, right next to him. "I read about this, my grandmother told me. If something calls your name in the woods, you don't answer. You don't go looking. You don't respond. It's not really calling you. It's something else." "Vanessa? Paulo? Derek? Where did you guys go? I can't find the camp." Now it was calling all their names, cycling through them. Derek's voice joined the chorus, then Paulo's. 3 perfect copies of their voices, pleading, confused, afraid, circling their camp in the darkness beyond the firelight. Paulo could track the movement. The voices were definitely moving, pacing around their clearing like wolves circling prey, sometimes close enough that he felt he could reach out and touch whoever was calling, sometimes farther away, echoing through the trees. "Guys, this isn't funny. I'm scared. Please. Why won't you answer me?" Derek stood up abruptly, his chair scraping, his face pale in the firelight. "That's my voice. How is that my voice? Is this a prank? Is there someone out there with a recording?" "Sit down," Paulo hissed, grabbing Derek's arm, pulling him back. "Don't respond. Don't." But Derek was already moving toward the darkness, toward his own voice calling for help. "Hello, who's there? This isn't funny." "Derek, stop." Vanessa lunged after him, and Paulo grabbed them both, using all his strength to pull them back into the light of the fire. Derek struggled against him, surprisingly strong, his eyes fixed on the darkness. "Let me go. Can't you hear them? They need help. That's not us, Paulo said firmly, holding tight even as Derek thrashed. Look at Vanessa. She's right here. That's not her voice, it just sounds like it. Whatever's out there, it's not human. The voices continued for 20 minutes, an eternity. They pleaded and cried and begged for help, shifting emotions with disturbing ease: fear, anger, confusion, pain. At one point, Paulo's voice screamed as if being attacked, and Vanessa clapped her hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face. Derek had finally stopped struggling and sat rigid and still, staring into the fire with blank eyes. Then, as suddenly as they'd started, the voices stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, more oppressive, heavy with presence and malice. Paulo could feel it now, not just watching anymore, but there, physical and real, just beyond the firelight. If he squinted into the darkness, he could almost see shapes, darker patches in the black moving with liquid grace between the trees. They sat close to the fire, not speaking, barely breathing, watching the tree line. Paulo could see shapes moving between the trunks now, or thought he could. Every time he focused on one, turned his head to look directly at it, it was just a tree or a shadow, or a trick of the flickering firelight. But in his peripheral vision they were there, figures standing motionless, dozens of them ringing their camp, watching, waiting. He counted at least 15 distinct shapes, all vaguely human, but wrong in ways he couldn't define. Too tall or too thin, or moving in ways that violated physics, appearing in one spot then another without crossing the space between. Sleep was impossible. They took turns keeping watch, though Paulo doubted any of them actually slept. Vanessa dozed fitfully, her head on Paulo's shoulder, jerking awake every few minutes with gasps of terror. Derek sat motionless, his eyes reflecting the firelight, looking almost catatonic. Paulo fed wood to the fire obsessively, terrified of what might happen if the light went out. The darkness pressed closer with each log he added, as if the fire was holding it back through sheer force of will. Around 3 a.m., though time had become meaningless, could have been midnight or dawn, Paulo saw movement at the edge of the clearing, not peripheral this time, but direct. A figure stepped into the very edge of the firelight's reach, and for a moment Paulo saw it clearly. It looked like Vanessa, exactly like her, down to the pink jacket she was wearing, the way her hair fell across her face, even the small scar on her chin from a childhood bicycle accident. But its eyes were wrong, completely black, reflecting the firelight like an animal's. And it was smiling, a too wide smile that showed too many teeth, a smile that split its face almost to its ears. "Paulo," it said in Vanessa's voice, the real Vanessa stirring beside him, still asleep. "Why won't you answer me? Don't you love me anymore?" Paulo couldn't speak, couldn't move, paralyzed by the wrongness of it. The thing tilted its head at an angle no human neck could achieve, almost 90 degrees, still smiling that horrible smile. "I'm right here," it said. "All you have to do is come to me." It extended a hand, and Paulo saw the fingers were too long, the joints bending in too many places. Then Derek threw a burning log at it. The thing vanished instantly, there 1 second and gone the next. No movement, no running, just erased from existence. The log landed where it had been standing, sparks flying, and there was no trace that anything had been there at all. No footprints in the dirt, no disturbed leaves, nothing. "It's not real," Derek said, his voice monotone, dead. "None of this is real. We're hallucinating. Bad water or something. Has to be." But Paulo knew it was real. He'd felt the malevolence radiating from that thing, the ancient hunger in those black eyes. Whatever haunted these mountains, it was very real, and it wanted them. Dawn came wrong. One moment, it was full dark, oppressive and complete. The next pale gray light was filtering through the canopy. But Paulo had no memory of the transition. No gradual lightening, no first birds, no color returning to the world. Just dark, then light, like someone had flipped a switch. His watch read 6:47 a.m., but he could have sworn only 3 hours had passed since sunset, not 12. The fire had burned down to embers, though Paulo had just added wood, and the log pile they'd gathered, enough for all night, was completely gone, as if they'd burned through all of it. "We're leaving," Paulo said, his voice rough from fear and sleeplessness. "Right now. We're going back." They packed quickly, not speaking, hands shaking, stuffing gear into backpacks without their usual care. Vanessa's careful photo equipment got shoved in roughly. Derek left his empty flask behind. Paulo abandoned some of their food, just wanting to move, to get out, to escape. They started back the way they'd come, following Paulo's GPS track, which was miraculously working again, showing a clear path back to the trailhead, at least the way Paulo thought they'd come. But the trail looked different in the pale morning light. Or was it morning light? The sun was up, hidden behind the canopy, but its light seemed filtered through something, indirect, creating no clear shadows. Everything looked flat, two-dimensional, like a photograph or a painting rather than a real place. The white blazes pointed the opposite direction from what Paulo expected. If these markers indicated the trail, they were saying to go deeper into the mountains, not back toward the parking lot. But his GPS said this was the right way, the way they'd come. Paulo decided to trust the GPS, even though it had been completely wrong yesterday. They walked for 2 hours. The trail markers had vanished entirely now, not even painted over spots where they used to be, just trees without any blazes at all. Paulo's GPS showed them making progress, getting closer to the trailhead, 4.7 miles, then 3.2 miles, then 1.8 miles. But the forest didn't change, didn't thin out, didn't show any signs of approaching civilization. Every tree looked the same, every hollow and rise indistinguishable from the last. And still, that sensation of being watched persisted, stronger now, as if whatever observed them was drawing closer, emboldened by daylight or hungry for the chase. "Paulo." Vanessa grabbed his arm hard enough to bruise. "Look." Through the trees ahead, impossibly, unbelievably, stood their campsite. The same clearing, the exact same clearing. The ashes of their fire still smoking, gray wisps rising into the still air. Their tent, which Paulo had collapsed and packed into his bag, he could feel its weight on his back right now, stood fully erected, exactly as it had been last night. "No," Derek said, his voice breaking. "No, we've been walking away. We've been walking for hours." The GPS said, but there was no denying it. They'd somehow circled back, or the forest had rearranged itself around them, or they'd never left at all, had been walking in place like some nightmare treadmill. Paulo's hand shook as he checked his backpack. He unzipped it with numb fingers. The tent was still packed inside, the fabric bunched and compressed, somehow occupying 2 places at once, in his bag and standing erected in the clearing. "This isn't possible," Paulo whispered. His mind refused to accept it, kept trying to find rational explanations. They'd gotten turned around. This was a different campsite that looked similar. Someone was playing an elaborate prank. But he knew deep in his gut that none of those explanations were true. A twig snapped behind them, loud as a gunshot in the silence. All 3 spun around. The forest stared back, empty and waiting. But Paulo could feel it now. Not just watching anymore, not just circling. Whatever had been observing them all night was right there, just beyond the threshold of visibility, close enough to touch, close enough that he could feel its breath on the back of his neck, smell something wrong and rotten and ancient. "Run," Paulo said. They ran. Direction didn't matter anymore. Sense didn't matter. The illusion of control was gone. They crashed through underbrush, branches tearing at their clothes and skin, leaped over fallen logs and rocks, splashed through streams, Vanessa's camera banging against her chest, Derek's empty pack flapping behind him, Paulo's carefully planned route abandoned. The forest blurred around them, green and brown and shadow, trees seeming to lean in as they passed, roots reaching up to trip them, the ground itself seeming to shift and move beneath their feet. Paulo heard Vanessa gasping behind him, her breath coming in terrified sobs. Derek was cursing steadily, a stream of profanity that might have been prayers. Paulo's own breath burned in his lungs, his legs screaming with effort, but he didn't stop, couldn't stop, driven by pure animal panic. Then Vanessa screamed, high and sharp and cut off. Paulo spun around, nearly falling. Derek was still there, bent over and panting, his face red and streaming with sweat. But Vanessa had vanished. She'd been right behind them. Paulo had heard her breathing, her footsteps, her gasps of effort, and now the forest stood empty as if she'd never existed. The air itself seemed to have absorbed her, swallowed her whole. "Vanessa!" Paulo's shout was swallowed by the trees, dead and flat, no echo, no resonance, just silence. "She was right there," Derek said, his voice breaking into pieces. "She was right fucking there, I heard her, she was right there." They searched. For hours they searched. They called her name until their voices were raw and bloody in their throats. They retraced their steps, marked trees with Paulo's knife, set up a grid pattern like Paulo had read in his 17 pages of hiking advice that seemed like they were from another lifetime. Nothing. No footprints in the soft earth, no torn fabric on the bushes they'd pushed through, no sign of a struggle or fall or attack. Vanessa had simply ceased to be, erased from existence as thoroughly as if she'd never been born. The forest grew darker, though Paulo's watch insisted it was only noon, sun directly overhead. The shadows lengthened impossibly, stretching in directions that had nothing to do with the sun's position. And from somewhere in the distance, so faint he might have imagined it, Paulo heard Vanessa's laugh. That infectious sound that made strangers smile, that had made him fall in love with her, that he'd hoped to hear for the rest of his life, echoing through the ancient trees. But there was something wrong with it, something broken and distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. "We need to find help," Derek said, his eyes wild, his hands shaking. "Rangers, police, anyone. We need search dogs, helicopters, we need—" They picked a direction and walked, no longer running, just moving like automatons, one foot in front of the other. Hours passed, or days, or minutes. Time had lost meaning. The scenery never changed. The same types of trees, oak and maple and birch. The same quality of light, that flat, wrong illumination that cast no shadows. The same sensation of vast, watchful presence, patient and hungry and eternal. Paulo's mind had gone numb, shut down, unable to process what was happening. He moved mechanically, his body still functioning while his consciousness retreated somewhere small and dark and safe. He thought about Vanessa's students waiting for her to come back after fall break. He thought about her mother, who was planning the wedding, who had already picked out her dress. He thought about the engagement ring that had cost him 3 months' salary, that Vanessa wore on a chain around her neck while hiking because she was afraid of losing it. When they found the staircase again, Paulo felt something inside him break. The same dark red metal, the same 8 steps to nowhere, the same industrial carpet on the treads. Except now there was something at the top, hanging from the highest step. A pink backpack. Vanessa's pink backpack. The one Derek had been joking about yesterday or a lifetime ago. The one that should be with Vanessa wherever she was. "No," Paulo said. "No, we're not." But Derek was already climbing, taking the steps 2 at a time, his movements jerky and desperate. Paulo lunged after him, grabbed for his ankle, but Derek was too fast, had reached the top, had grabbed the backpack with both hands. His face went slack. The backpack fell from his fingers, tumbling down the stairs in slow motion, bouncing once, twice, 3 times before landing at Paulo's feet. Derek's eyes were unfocused, staring at something Paulo couldn't see, something above or beyond or inside. Pupils dilated until his eyes were almost black. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then smoothly, mechanically like a puppet with cut strings, Derek stepped backward off the stairs and into empty air. He didn't fall. The laws of physics Paulo had trusted his entire life meant nothing here. Derek just vanished, erased from existence mid-step, as if an invisible door had swallowed him whole, as if the air itself had been waiting with open jaws. Paulo stood alone at the base of the staircase. The backpack lay at his feet, its pink fabric obscenely bright in the dim forest. From inside it, he could hear Vanessa's phone playing music, her favorite song, that pop song she'd had on repeat during the entire drive to the mountains, the one Paulo had been sick of but now would give anything to hear her singing along to just one more time. The trees pressed closer. The light dimmed further, though it was still somehow noon, always noon, eternally noon. And Paulo understood finally that the forest had been patient. It had been herding them, playing with them, savoring their fear like a gourmet savors wine. The Appalachian Mountains had stood for 300 million years, and they would stand for 300 million more, and human lives were nothing but brief, bright sparks in their ancient darkness, here and gone, forgotten, absorbed into the deep earth and the patient stones. Something moved in his peripheral vision. He forced himself not to look, but he knew what he would see if he did. Vanessa and Derek, standing among the trees, watching him with eyes that were no longer quite right, mouths that smiled too wide, voices that would call his name in perfect imitation. They were part of it now, part of the forest, part of whatever ancient thing dwelt in these mountains, and fed on fear and loneliness and despair. Paulo? Why won't you answer? We're waiting for you. Don't you want to be with us? Paulo ran. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out, until he collapsed in a heap on the forest floor, until his body simply couldn't move anymore. He ran through darkness and light that cycled too quickly, night and day and night again in the span of heartbeats. He ran past the same landmarks over and over, the twisted tree, the unmarked stream, the clearing with his tent that he'd never reach, the red staircase appearing again and again and again like some hellish mile marker. He ran until he couldn't remember why he was running, couldn't remember his own name, couldn't remember anything except the fundamental animal need to escape, to flee, to survive at any cost. When the park rangers found him 3 days later, 22 miles from where he'd started in a straight line that should have been impossible to walk through the dense forest, Paulo was unconscious from dehydration, his lips cracked and bleeding, his feet torn and bloody, his fingernails broken from clawing at trees. His watch had stopped at 6:47 a.m. His compass spun uselessly, even removed from the magnetic influence of the mountains. His phone's battery was completely dead despite being in his pack the entire time. But when they charged it at the ranger station, his last photo, time-stamped to 9:52 on that first Friday morning, an eternity ago, showed Vanessa and Derek smiling at the camera, happy and alive and innocent. But the photo had been taken from an angle that suggested a fourth person had been with them, standing back and slightly to the right. The rangers recognized the background. It was a section of forest 8 miles from where the trio had entered, accessible only by an unmaintained trail that hadn't appeared on Paulo's map, a trail that old-timers said led to bad places, to thin spots where the world was worn through. They never found Vanessa or Derek. Extensive searches turned up nothing. No clothes, no equipment, no bodies, no sign they'd ever existed. The watching trail. The October mist clung to the Appalachian ridgeline like something alive, something hungry. Marcus Chen adjusted his expensive camera rig and grinned at his phone screen, watching the viewer count climb. 23,000 people watching him live stream from what he dubbed America's most haunted mountain range. At 26, with his athletic build, carefully styled black hair, and perpetual smirk of confidence, Marcus had built his brand on debunking local legends and mocking superstitious hillbillies, as he not so affectionately called them. "So yeah, guys, we're here at the Ravens Fork Trail," he announced to his phone, panning across the dense forest. "The locals literally begged me not to come up here. Said people disappear. Said the mountain doesn't like strangers." He laughed, the sound sharp and out of place in the ancient quiet. "Well, the mountain's gonna have to deal with me." Behind him, his girlfriend Emma shifted nervously. At 24, she was smaller, softer, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and worry lines already forming around her green eyes. She'd been against this trip from the start, but Marcus never listened. He never listened to anyone. Their third companion, Kyle, was too hungover to care about much of anything. The lanky 25-year-old had shown up to the trailhead reeking of whiskey, his blonde hair a mess, his hiking boots unlaced. He'd barely made it a mile before complaining. "Marcus, man, can we just camp at the first clearing?" Kyle groaned. "My head's killing me." "Dude, we're going to the old fire tower, the one past the restricted zone." Marcus didn't even look back. "That's where all the disappearances happened. That's the content." Emma touched his arm. "The ranger said that area was closed for a reason. There was nothing," Marcus interrupted. "It's a PR stunt to keep tourists away. Trust me, babe. This is gonna go viral." They'd started the hike at noon, already later than any experienced hiker would recommend. Marcus had spent the morning doing shots with Kyle, and Emma had waited in the car, checking and rechecking their supplies, knowing they were insufficient. One flashlight between them, no GPS beacon, no paper map. Marcus relied entirely on his phone, and they were already in an area with spotty service. The trail wound deeper into the mountains, the trees pressing closer. These were old trees, their trunks thick and twisted, their branches forming a canopy so dense that the afternoon light turned green and strange. The forest floor was carpeted with leaves that muffled their footsteps, and somewhere in the distance a bird called out, a sound like a scream cut short. Marcus filmed it all, narrating with the same mocking tone that had earned him followers and enemies in equal measure. "Oh wow, scary trees, so spooky. I'm literally shaking." His viewers ate it up, the comment section scrolling too fast to read. Emma noticed it first, the silence. It happened gradually, the normal sounds of the forest fading until there was nothing but their footsteps and Kyle's labored breathing. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. She opened her mouth to mention it, but something stopped her. An instinct older than thought, the prey animal awareness that humans had spent millennia trying to forget. Something was watching them. She turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it intensified, like invisible eyes boring into her back, her neck, her skull. Multiple sets of eyes, she realized with a chill, from different directions. "Marcus," she whispered. "Not now, babe. I'm getting gold here." He was filming a tree with a strange pattern in its bark, making jokes about it looking like a screaming face. His viewers loved it. They walked for another hour, and Emma's unease grew with every step. The trail seemed different from the map Marcus had glanced at that morning, narrower, overgrown. The markers were faded or missing entirely. Several times she could have sworn they passed the same lightning-struck oak, but that was impossible. They were moving forward, weren't they? Kyle stumbled, catching himself against a tree. "Guys, I need to stop, seriously." Marcus spun around, annoyed. "We're almost there, you lightweight. The tower's just over the next ridge." "How do you know?" Emma asked. The question came out sharper than she'd intended. "You haven't checked the map in over an hour and your phone doesn't have service." "I can see it," Marcus insisted, pointing. "Through the trees, that dark shape." Emma looked. She saw nothing but more forest, more shadows. But Marcus was already walking again, faster now, excited by his imagined proximity to viral fame. That's when Kyle stopped following. It happened so simply, so quietly, that neither Emma nor Marcus noticed at first. They kept walking, kept talking, Marcus to his phone, Emma to herself in worried mutters, until Marcus wanted Kyle in a shot and turned around to find empty trail behind them. "Kyle," Marcus called. His voice seemed swallowed by the trees, traveling barely a few feet before dying in the unnatural quiet. "Kyle, stop screwing around." Nothing, not even an echo. Emma's heart began to hammer. "When did you last see him?" "I don't know. 2 minutes ago? 5? Marcus's confidence was cracking. He was right there. They backtracked, calling Kyle's name, their voices growing more desperate. Emma's sense of being watched had become unbearable, a physical pressure against her skin. She kept spinning around, certain she'd see someone standing behind her, but there was never anyone there. Just trees, just shadows, just the absolute absence of normal forest sounds. They found Kyle's phone first, lying face up on the trail. The screen was cracked, and when Marcus picked it up, it was still recording. 42 minutes of footage, just trees and sky and the sound of breathing. Then the breathing stopped. Then nothing but silent forest for the remaining time. "This doesn't make sense," Marcus said, his influencer persona completely gone now. His hands shook as he checked the video timestamp. According to the phone, Kyle had dropped it 7 minutes ago. They'd walked for maybe 2 minutes before noticing he was gone. Where the hell is he? Emma was looking at something else. 20 feet off the trail, partially hidden by undergrowth, was one of Kyle's hiking boots. Just one. Unlaced, tipped on its side, as if it had been carefully placed there. Next to it, pressed into the soft earth, was a footprint. Bare. Human. But wrong somehow in ways Emma's mind refused to process, the proportions just slightly off. The toes too long, the heel too wide. "Marcus," she breathed. He saw it. They both stared at the boot, neither wanting to acknowledge what its presence meant. Kyle hadn't stopped to take his boot off. He hadn't sat down to rest. Something had removed it, or he'd lost it while being dragged, or... The snap of a branch froze them both. It came from deeper in the woods, from the direction of the boot. Close. Very close. "Kyle," Marcus called, but his voice had gone thin and high. "That you, man?" The undergrowth rustled. Something was moving through it, moving toward them, but Emma couldn't see what. Couldn't see anything. Just the plants shifting, bending, as if something large was pushing through them. But there was nothing there. Nothing visible. "We need to go," Emma whispered. "Now." "We can't just leave him." "Now, Marcus." They ran. Emma grabbed Marcus's arm and pulled him back toward the trail, back the way they'd come, back toward the trailhead and civilization and sanity. The forest seemed to close in around them, the path narrowing, branches reaching like gnarled fingers. Marcus's phone tumbled from his pocket, cracking against a rock, the live stream cutting off and leaving 23,000 viewers staring at a connection-lost screen. They ran until Emma's lungs burned and her legs trembled, Marcus stumbling behind her. When they finally stopped, gasping and wild-eyed, they both realized the same terrible thing. They were lost. The trail was gone. Not overgrown, not hidden. Simply gone, as if it had never existed. They stood in a small clearing surrounded by identical trees in every direction. The sky above was the wrong color, a sickly yellow-gray that hurt to look at. And it was getting dark. Too dark. Too fast. It had been maybe 4 o'clock when Kyle disappeared. Now it looked like twilight. "This is wrong," Emma said. She was shaking, her skin crawling with the certainty of being watched. "Everything is wrong." Marcus turned in a slow circle, his confidence completely shattered. "Where's the trail? We were just on it. We were just... Look." Emma was pointing at something that made Marcus's blood turn to ice water. In the center of the clearing, half hidden by fallen leaves, was a staircase. Made of stone and metal, it rose about 10 feet into the air and ended abruptly, leading nowhere. The steps were old, covered in moss and rust, but structurally sound. Wrong. Impossible. But there. "Don't look at it," Emma whispered, remembering something her grandmother had told her about the mountains, stories she'd dismissed as superstition until this exact moment. "Don't look at it, and whatever you do, don't climb it." But Marcus was already walking toward it, drawn by some compulsion he couldn't name. His feet moved without his permission, carrying him to the base of the stairs. Up close he could see scratches in the stone, marks that might have been words in a language he didn't recognize, or might have been something else entirely. Claw marks. The stairs were impossibly cold, radiating a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "Marcus, please." Emma's voice was distant, muffled, as if she were calling from underwater. He looked up. At the top of the stairs, where there should have been nothing but empty air, stood Kyle. Marcus's friend looked down at him with an expression that was almost Kyle's smile, but not quite. The proportions were off. The way the face moved was wrong, like someone wearing a Kyle mask that didn't fit properly. And his eyes were completely black, reflecting nothing, absorbing the fading light like holes in reality. "Come up," not Kyle said, and his voice was Kyle's voice layered with something else, something that buzzed and clicked like insect wings. "The view is amazing. You can see everything from up here." Marcus's foot touched the first step. Frost spread from the contact point, crawling up his shoe, his ankle, reaching for his knee. Emma screamed his name and lunged forward, grabbing his jacket and pulling with all her strength. For a moment, Marcus resisted, his face blank, his eyes reflecting the same empty darkness as not Kyle's. Then something broke, the spell, the compulsion. Whatever unnatural force had seized him, and he stumbled backward, falling against Emma. They went down in a tangle of limbs. When they looked up, the stairs were empty. Not Kyle was gone, but the staircase itself seemed to pulse, seemed to breathe, and from somewhere nearby came a sound like laughter filtered through static. They ran again, crashing through underbrush, no longer caring about the trail, just needing to move to escape. Branches whipped their faces, roots tried to trip them. The forest itself seemed hostile now, actively working against them. Emma's rational mind tried to make sense of it. Hallucinations from stress, carbon monoxide from some natural source, mass hysteria. But that small, primal part of her brain knew the truth. They'd broken the rules. Marcus had mocked the mountain, had challenged it, and now it was answering. The Appalachians were old, older than human civilization, older than human memory. And they remembered everything. Every person who'd walked their trails with respect and every person who'd come with arrogance. The forest didn't like arrogance. They burst into another clearing, smaller than the first, and Emma's heart sank. The staircase was there again. The same one. Impossible. They'd been running away from it, had put dozens of yards between them and that cursed structure. But here it was, waiting for them like it had never left. "It's following us," Marcus gasped. The smirking influencer was completely gone now, replaced by a terrified child. "Oh God, Emma, it's following us. We need to find the actual trail." Emma forced herself to think, to push past the panic. "The ranger station. Help. We need to—" A whistle cut through the air. Sharp, clear, melodic. It came from their left, from deeper in the darkening forest. Then another whistle, identical, from their right. Then behind them. Then ahead. They were surrounded by a chorus of whistling, beautiful and terrible, in perfect harmony, but somehow wrong, somehow inhuman. The whistling stopped. In the sudden silence, Emma heard breathing that wasn't theirs. All around them, just beyond the tree line, something was breathing. Multiple somethings, standing still, watching. "Emma," Marcus whispered, "do you see them?" She didn't want to look. Everything in her screamed not to look. But she couldn't help it. Her eyes tracked to the nearest shadow between two ancient oaks. Something stood there, tall, impossibly tall, with proportions that made her eyes water. It was shaped roughly like a person, but wrong in ways that transcended normal wrongness. Its limbs were too long, too thin, jointed in too many places. Its head tilted at an angle that should have broken its neck. And its eyes, if those dark pits could be called eyes, fixed on her with an intelligence that was vast and cold and utterly alien to anything human. It smiled. The smile was Kyle's smile, worn on something that had never been Kyle. There were more of them. Emma's peripheral vision caught movement, shapes sliding between trees, always just at the edge of sight. 6, 10, dozens. An audience of watchers, of things that wore human features like masks, surrounding them in a slowly tightening circle. One of them spoke. "Lost?" It had Kyle's voice. Another one echoed it with Emma's voice. "Lost?" A third used Marcus's voice, his exact intonation from earlier. "The mountain's gonna have to deal with me." The chorus of stolen voices laughed, a sound like breaking glass and dying birds. Marcus grabbed Emma's hand. "On 3 we run, straight ahead, don't stop." "Marcus." 1. The things stepped closer, their movements jerky and wrong, like stop-motion animation missing frames. 2. A smell hit them, decay and flowers and something chemical that burned the nose. The whistling started again, closer now, coming from mouths that weren't made for human sounds. 3. They ran straight into the circle of watchers. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, certain she'd feel inhuman hands grabbing her, pulling her apart. But they passed through empty air. When she opened her eyes, they were running down a clear trail, marked and maintained, with the amber light of late afternoon filtering through normal trees. Behind them, the forest was silent. No whistling, no breathing, no watchers, just normal woods on a normal autumn day. They didn't stop running until they reached the trailhead parking lot. Marcus's car sat alone in the gravel lot, covered in fallen leaves as if it had been there for days instead of hours. Emma's legs gave out and she collapsed against the hood, sobbing with relief and residual terror. Marcus fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice. When he finally got the car started, he burned rubber getting out of there, not caring about speed limits or road conditions, just needing distance between them and those mountains. They drove in silence for the first hour. Emma stared at her hands, trying to process what had happened, trying to fit it into any rational framework. Impossible, but real. She'd felt it, seen it. Those things in the forest wearing Kyle's face, wearing human shapes like costumes. "We need to tell someone," she finally said. "The rangers, the police. Kyle is still up there." Marcus's laugh was bitter and broken. "And tell them what? That the forest is full of shadow people who steal faces? That there are staircases to nowhere that eat your friends? They'll think we killed him, Emma. They'll think we're insane. But Kyle is gone." Marcus's voice was flat, dead. "Whatever those things are, whatever happened to him, he's not coming back." They reported Kyle missing the next morning, sticking to a simple story. He'd wandered off, they'd searched, they'd gotten lost, they'd barely made it out themselves. The rangers mounted a search that lasted 6 days. They found nothing. No body, no trace, no sign Kyle had ever set foot in those mountains. Well, almost nothing. On the 7th day, a ranger found something strange about a mile off the Raven's Fork Trail, in an area that had been searched multiple times already. It was one of Kyle's hiking boots, standing upright on a flat rock like it had been carefully placed there. Next to it was Marcus's cracked phone, fully charged despite having been lost for a week. When they checked the video files, they found something that made the lead investigator go pale. The last video on the phone, time-stamped the day after Marcus and Emma had emerged from the forest, showed Kyle. He was standing in a clearing, smiling at the camera, waving. Behind him, barely visible in the shadows, were dozens of figures. Tall, wrong, watching. Kyle spoke to the camera. "If anyone sees this, don't come looking for me. The mountain doesn't give back what it takes, but it's not so bad here. You get used to the watching. You get used to the whistling. After a while, you even start to like it." His smile widened, too wide, splitting his face in ways faces shouldn't split. "Marcus, Emma, thanks for visiting. Come back soon. We'll be waiting." The video cut to black. The investigator who watched it took early retirement. The phone was logged as evidence and then mysteriously lost in a warehouse fire 6 months later. The official explanation for Kyle's disappearance was that he'd suffered a mental break, wandered off trail, and succumbed to exposure. His body, the report stated, was likely scavenged by wildlife and would never be recovered. Marcus deleted all his social media. He never went near the mountains again, wouldn't even drive through them. On bad nights, he'd wake up certain he heard whistling outside his window, certain he saw tall shadows standing in his yard, watching with patient, inhuman eyes. Emma tried to move on, tried to forget, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her home from those mountains. She'd catch movement in her peripheral vision, always just at the edge of sight. She'd hear Kyle's voice sometimes, calling her name from empty rooms, And on October nights, when the wind blew just right, she could swear she heard that chorus of whistling, beautiful and terrible, reminding her that the mountains remembered. The Ravens Fork Trail remained open. People still hiked it despite the warnings from locals, and every few years someone else would disappear. They'd find odd things after: shoes arranged in patterns, phones with impossible videos, staircases where no staircases should be. The rangers installed new signs warning hikers about the dangers of the trail, about staying on marked paths, about the importance of hiking in groups. What they didn't put on the signs was the old warning, the one the mountain people had whispered for generations. If you hear someone call your name in the woods, don't answer. It's never who you think it is. The mountains keep their secrets. The mountains remember everything. And the mountains are always watching, waiting for the next person who thinks they're too clever, too brave, too modern to believe in old warnings. The forest has patience. It has time. It's been there for millions of years, and it will be there for millions more, long after humanity is gone. And somewhere in those ancient hills, in clearings that appear and disappear like dreams, Kyle stands at the top of a staircase to nowhere, smiling his wrong smile, waiting for his friends to come back and visit. Around him, the watchers whistle their beautiful, terrible song, and the forest breathes in the dark, content with its newest collection. The Appalachians don't forgive arrogance. They never have. They never will. And Marcus Chen, who'd built his brand on mockery and disbelief, learned that lesson too late, but learned it well. Some nights in his locked apartment in a city far from any mountains, he'd dream of climbing those stone stairs, of seeing what Kyle saw from the top. In those dreams, he'd hear the whistling grow closer, feel inhuman eyes upon him, and know with terrible certainty that the mountain hadn't forgotten him. It was only a matter of time before it called him back. And someday, maybe someday soon, he'd have to answer.